Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
I drove 9 hours through a snowstorm to surprise my wife on her birthday, only to hear her laughing about how she wished I'd die for the insurance money. That was the night everything changed. Betrayed by the woman he loved and the best friend he trusted most, one man silently vanished only to return with a plan so calculated it would unravel lives in front of an entire community. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's a masterclass in revenge, justice, and how one man turned heartbreak into a symphony of destruction. Stick around because what started with a birthday cake ends with public humiliation, FBI investigations, and a hurricane party no one would forget. Before we begin, let me know where you're tuning in from down in the comments. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next tale. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the relentless snow. Thomas gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white beneath the dashboard's pale glow. 9 hours, 9 goddamn hours of driving through what the weather reports were calling Florida's freak winter storm of the century. His back ached, his eyes burned, but none of that mattered. Not when midnight was approaching, and he'd promised to be home for her birthday. The headlights carved through the darkness, illuminating the swirling chaos ahead. Interstate 75 had turned into a treacherous ribbon of ice and slush. Most drivers had pulled off hours ago, seeking shelter in roadside motels. But Thomas pressed on, the BMW's heated seats doing little to warm the anticipation in his chest. He glanced at the passenger seat where the cake box sat, secured a 3-tier masterpiece from Atlanta's finest bakery, chocolate ganache with raspberry filling, her favorite. Beside it, the small velvet box containing the pearl necklace she'd admired last month at the jewelry store downtown. She'd tried to hide her disappointment when they'd left without it, but Thomas had seen. He always saw. 5 years. 5 years of marriage, and he still felt that flutter in his stomach when he thought of her smile. Sure, things had been tense lately. The real estate market was showing signs of strain, deals were getting harder to close, and the pressure was mounting. She'd been distant, spending more time at the spa, more evenings with her sister. But that was just stress, wasn't it? They'd weather this storm like they'd weathered everything else. The clock on the dashboard read 11:47 p.m. as he finally turned onto their street in the upscale Sarasota subdivision. The snow had given way to a cold, miserable rain here closer to the coast. Every house glowed with warm light except theirs. Only the porch light was on, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. Thomas pulled into the driveway, his body protesting as he climbed out of the car. His shirt clung to him with sweat despite the cold, and his legs felt like lead. He grabbed the cake and the gift, moving quietly to the front door. He'd surprise her, walk in singing happy birthday at the stroke of midnight. His key turned silently in the lock. The house was quiet except for voices drifting from the living room, female voices, laughter. God, I really hope he gets into an accident and dies on the way home. Thomas froze in the foyer, his blood turning to ice. That was his wife's voice, but the words. They couldn't be real. The insurance money would set me free. I can't stand pretending to love that boring bastard for one more day. The cake box trembled in his hands. Through the archway, he could see them, his wife sprawled on the leather sofa, wine glass in hand. Her sister Michelle perched on the armchair, both of them giggling like schoolgirls sharing a cruel secret. Michelle's laugh was sharp, cutting. Or at least a few months apiece without having to hear him drone on about work and money. You deserve better than that, honey. Jason would give you the life you've always dreamed of. Jason knows how to make a woman feel alive, his wife purred, and the sound made Thomas's stomach turn. Not like Mr. Predictable. Do you know he actually schedules our sex? Every Tuesday and Saturday, like it's a business meeting. Their laughter filled the room, filled his head, filled the hollow space where his heart used to be. Thomas moved like a ghost, setting the cake on the kitchen counter with mechanical precision. His body operated on autopilot while his mind reeled, trying to process the brutal truth. 5 years. 5 years of his life, his love, his absolute faith in her shattered in 30 seconds of overheard conversation. The women's voices grew louder, more animated. They were discussing Jason, his business partner in the Sunshine Shores development. Jason, who'd been to their house for dinner dozens of times. Jason, who'd smiled and shaken his hand just last week. Thomas looked down at the pristine cake. "Happy birthday, my love," written in elegant script across the top. His hands weren't shaking anymore. Something cold and hard had settled in his chest, replacing the initial shock. He picked up the velvet box, turned it over in his palm once, then set it beside the cake. Let her find them in the morning. Let her know he'd heard everything. Without a sound, he climbed the stairs to their bedroom. No, his bedroom now. Behind the closed door, he didn't scream or cry or punch the wall. He simply sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing his damp clothes, and stared at the wedding photo on the nightstand. The man in that photo was dead. He'd died somewhere on Interstate 75 between Atlanta and Sarasota in a snowstorm that shouldn't have existed in Florida. What remained was something else entirely. Something that would wait, plan, and execute justice with the same precision he'd once reserved for closing deals. Downstairs, the laughter continued, each peal another nail in the coffin of his former life. Thomas lay on the guest bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling fan's lazy rotation. The digital clock beside him marked each passing minute with ruthless precision. 2:17 a.m. The house had fallen silent an hour ago, after Michelle's car pulled out of the driveway. He'd heard his wife, "No, Hannah," just Hannah now stumble up the stairs, humming tunelessly, drunk on wine and cruelty. The words replayed in his mind with crystalline clarity. Not just the wish for his death, but the casual contempt, the easy betrayal, the mention of Jason. Christ, Jason, how long had it been going on? Thomas forced himself to think back, to examine their interactions with fresh eyes. The lunches that ran long, the way she'd light up when Jason's name appeared on her phone, her sudden interest in the Sunshine Shores project details, the new lingerie he'd found in the laundry Victoria's Secret, not the practical cotton she usually wore. He'd thought she was trying to rekindle things between them. What a fool. Thomas sat up slowly, his body aching from the drive and the tension. In the darkness, he pulled out his phone and began scrolling through their joint bank statements. There a cash withdrawal of $800 last Tuesday when she'd said she was getting her hair done. Another $1,000 the week before. Charges at the Ritz-Carlton downtown on days she'd claimed to be shopping with friends. His real estate developer's mind kicked into gear, organizing data, seeing patterns. This wasn't a momentary lapse or a drunken fantasy. This was calculated, planned, and if Hannah was feeding Jason information about the Sunshine Shores development. Thomas stood abruptly. No, he wouldn't let anger drive him. Anger made people sloppy, and he couldn't afford to be sloppy. Not now. He moved to his home office, closing the door silently behind him. From the wall safe, he retrieved his passport, birth certificate, and the emergency cash he kept for hurricanes 10,000 in hundreds. His movements were methodical, purposeful. He wasn't running away. He was creating space to think, to plan. On his laptop, he opened a new document and began typing. Assets to protect. Joint checking, $47,000. Joint savings, $112,000. Investment portfolio, $340,000. Sunshine Shores stake, $500,000 potential house equity, $400,000 immediate actions needed. Legal counsel evidence gathering, asset protection, strategic positioning. He stared at the list, then deleted it. No digital trail. Not yet. From his desk drawer, he pulled out a legal pad and began writing by hand. The plan took shape with each stroke of the pen. He would disappear not forever, just long enough to destabilize them, to make them wonder, to make mistakes. While they scrambled, he would gather evidence, build his case, protect what was his. The note he would leave had to be perfect. Not emotional enough to suggest he might harm himself, he didn't want police involvement. Not angry enough to telegraph his intentions. Just gone. Thomas picked up a fresh sheet of paper and wrote in his careful script, Hannah, you have what you wanted. Peace and quiet. I'm gone. Don't look for me. Simple. Clean. Let her interpret it however she wished. By 4 a.m., he had packed a duffel bag with essentials, changes of clothes, toiletries, his personal laptop, the cash, and documents. He left behind anything traceable: credit cards, his work phone, even his wedding ring. That last item he placed deliberately on his desk, where she would find it. The house felt different in the pre-dawn darkness. No longer a home, but a crime scene where trust had been murdered. Thomas moved through it one last time, his footsteps silent on the hardwood floors. In the kitchen, the birthday cake still sat on the counter, the frosting beginning to sag. He placed his note beside it, weighted down with the jewelry box. Let her wake to reminders of what she'd destroyed. At the front door, Thomas paused. Somewhere upstairs, Hannah slept peacefully, unaware that her world was about to shift. She thought she knew him: predictable, boring Thomas. She was about to learn how wrong she was. He stepped out into the humid Florida morning. The storm had passed, leaving only the smell of rain and the promise of another scorching day. Thomas loaded his bag into the BMW and backed out of the driveway for the last time. As he drove toward the interstate, the sun began to paint the horizon in shades of orange and pink. Beautiful, deceptive, like everything else in his life had been. His phone buzzed work emails already. Thomas powered it off and tossed it into the glove compartment. Marcus Thomas, successful real estate developer, devoted husband, predictable bore, was checking out. What would emerge from this self-imposed exile was yet to be determined. But one thing was certain: Hannah and Jason would learn that predictability and weakness were not the same thing, not even close. The BMW disappeared into the morning traffic, just another car on another day in paradise. Inside, a man drove toward his resurrection. The Comfort Inn in Bradenton wasn't the kind of place Thomas usually stayed. Cash only, no questions asked. The perfect refuge for a man who needed to become invisible. He checked in under a false name, paid 3 nights in advance, and collapsed onto the thin mattress fully clothed. But sleep wouldn't come. His mind raced with the implications of what he'd discovered. By now, Hannah would have found the note. Was she panicking, celebrating, calling Jason to share the good news? At noon, Thomas finally called the one person he could trust absolutely: his brother Samuel. "Sam, it's me. I need you to meet me, alone. Brewster's Coffee on Cortez, 1 hour. "Thomas? What's wrong?" Hannah called here looking. 1 hour, Sam, please." The coffee shop was nearly empty, the lunch rush not yet begun. Samuel arrived 15 minutes early, his face creased with worry. 5 years younger, but looking older today, his engineer's mind already calculating scenarios. "Jesus, Tom. What happened? Hannah's going crazy. She said you left a note?" Thomas slid his phone across the table and played the recording he'd made of Hannah's conversation. He'd started recording his drives recently for business calls, never imagining it would capture this. Sam's face went from confusion to shock to cold fury. "That fucking bitch," Samuel breathed. "And Jason? How long?" "I don't know. That's what I need to find out." Thomas pulled out a business card. "I need you to contact this private investigator, Rick Morrison. Pay him in cash. I want everything: photos, recordings, financial transfers, everything. Done. What else? I need a lawyer, the best divorce attorney money can buy, someone who can protect my assets while I build my case." Samuel nodded, already pulling out his phone. "Stephen Frost. Remember him from college? He's exactly what you need. Handles high-net-worth divorces. The man's a shark in a suit." "Set it up. But Sam, I'm staying dark for now. Let Hannah wonder. Let her and Jason think they've won. When people think they're safe, they get careless." "Where are you staying?" "Better you don't know. I'll contact you daily." Thomas stood, then paused. "How did she sound when she called?" Samuel's jaw tightened. "Worried at first, then angry. Kept saying you were being childish, that you'd overreacted to something. Michelle was there. I could hear her in the background, coaching her." Of course she was. Michelle, who'd always resented Thomas for taking away her baby sister. Michelle, who'd planted seeds of discontent at every opportunity. Back in his motel room, Thomas opened his laptop and logged into their joint accounts through a VPN. The activity made his blood run cold. Over the past 3 months, Hannah had withdrawn nearly $20,000 in cash. Small amounts, spread out, designed not to trigger attention. But there was a pattern always before her: spa days or shopping trips. He screenshotted everything. His phone, a burner he'd bought at a gas station, buzzed. Sam. Rick can meet you tomorrow. And Tom? He's already been watching them. Says you might want to sit down for this. The next morning, Rick Morrison looked exactly like a man who'd spent 20 years as a cop before going private. Weathered face, sharp eyes, coffee permanently attached to his hand. He slid a manila envelope across the diner table. Your brother hired me 3 days ago. These are from yesterday. Thomas opened the envelope with steady hands. The photos were crystal clear. Hannah entering a luxury condo downtown, not Jason's official residence. Jason arriving 20 minutes later. The timestamp showed 2 p.m. when she'd texted Thomas she was getting a massage. The next photos were taken through a telephoto lens, a balcony, 2 figures embracing, kissing, Hannah's hand tangled in Jason's hair. The condo's a rental, Rick said quietly. Paid 6 months in advance cash. Name on the lease is fake, but the building manager ID'd Jason from a photo. Says they've been coming there for about 4 months. 4 months. While Thomas was working 18-hour days to make the Sunshine Shores project successful, while he was planning their 5th anniversary trip to Paris. There's more. Rick pulled out another set of photos. This was last weekend. A hotel in Key West. Hannah and Jason at dinner, her wearing the dress Thomas had bought her for Christmas, walking on the beach, entering a room together. I need audio, Thomas said, his voice surprisingly calm. Florida's a one-party consent state, if you can get them talking. Rick smiled grimly. Already on it. Give me a week. These types always get comfortable, start talking freely, especially if they think they've already won. Thomas paid Rick in cash and drove back to his motel. On the way, his burner rang. Hannah calling from her cell. He let it ring, counted the attempts. 15 calls in an hour. Then the text started. Where are you? This is ridiculous. Come home. We need to talk about whatever you think you heard. I'm calling the police if you don't respond. Finally, he typed back a single message. I need space. Stop calling. Then he powered off the phone and got back to work. The real estate market was showing cracks, but the Sunshine Shores project was still gold if handled correctly. And Thomas had just realized something crucial. Jason needed this project more than he did. The man was over-leveraged, had bought too high in the boom. If Jason was using inside information from Hannah to position himself better in the deal, well, that was corporate espionage, that was fraud, that was jail time. Thomas smiled for the first time in days. Hannah thought she'd married a predictable bore. She was about to discover she'd married a man who'd clawed his way up from nothing, who'd built a real estate empire through careful planning and ruthless execution. The game was just beginning. Rick Morrison's follow-up report arrived like a gift wrapped in shadows. Thomas met him at a truck stop off I-75, far from Sarasota's prying eyes. The private investigator looked pleased with himself, the look of a hunter who'd bagged big game. You wanted audio? I got you the whole symphony. Rick pushed a small digital recorder across the picnic table. Listen to track 3 first. Thomas put in the earbuds. Static, then Hannah's voice, clear as day. Told you he's getting suspicious. Last week he asked about the Nordstrom charges. Jason's laugh, dismissive. So what? Let him ask. Once I secure the Murphy investors using the project details you gave me, I'll have enough leverage to force him out. By the time your divorce is final, I'll own 70% of Sunshine Shores. And then we can finally stop sneaking around. A pause, rustling fabric. God, I'm so tired of pretending to care when he touches me. 6 more months, baby. Maybe less if he keeps being difficult. Your sister's idea about the life insurance was inspired. Michelle thinks we should wait until after the policy increase goes through. Another 2 months. Thomas pulled out the earbuds, his face carved from stone. They weren't just planning to leave him, they were planning to destroy him. Or worse. Where did you get this? Rick's smile was sharp. Parabolic microphone from their favorite restaurant. That condo balcony of theirs faces a public parking garage. Perfect angle. He slid over more photos. But this is the real treasure. Bank statements, not Hannah's, Jason's. Large cash deposits matching Hannah's withdrawals, down to the penny. A paper trail of financial fraud that would make any prosecutor salivate. He's been using the cash to pay bribes, Rick explained. Building inspectors, permit officials, trying to fast-track approvals for Sunshine Shores so he can flip his portion quick. Your wife's been funding his corruption with your money. Thomas's phone buzzed. Another voicemail from Hannah. He'd been gone 5 days now, and her messages had evolved from angry to pleading to desperate. This one was different theatrical tears, Michelle's voice coaching in the background. "Tommy, baby, I'm so sorry for whatever I said. Michelle and I had too much wine. We were just joking. You know how we get. Please come home. I love you. I'm scared something's happened to you." He played it for Rick, who snorted. "She's good. I'll give her that." "Not good enough." Thomas pocketed the recorder and evidence. "I have a meeting with my lawyer tomorrow. Keep tracking them. I want to know every meeting, every conversation, every transaction." "What about protection?" Rick's expression was serious. That life insurance talk wasn't casual. Thomas had already considered this. "I'm never alone, never in a predictable location, and I've already contacted my insurance company about suspicious inquiries." He stood. "They're amateurs, Rick. They think they're playing checkers. They don't realize this is chess." The next morning, Stephen Frost's office occupied the top floor of a Sarasota high-rise. The man himself looked like he'd been carved from legal precedents, silver-haired, sharp-suited, with eyes that had seen every type of marital betrayal imaginable. "This is exceptional work," Stephen said, reviewing the evidence. "Adultery, financial fraud, conspiracy to commit corporate espionage, and these references to life insurance. Thomas, this isn't just grounds for favorable divorce terms. This is criminal." "I know. What do you want? Realistically?" Thomas had spent days thinking about this. "Everything. The house, the investments, the majority of our liquid assets. No alimony. And I want Jason destroyed legally, financially, professionally." Stephen's smile was predatory. "Consider it done, but we need to move strategically. First, we freeze the assets. I'll file emergency motions today, citing financial malfeasance. Second, we document everything for both the divorce and potential criminal charges. Third," he leaned forward, "we need to control the narrative. Right now, she's playing the worried wife. We need to flip that script dramatically." "I have an idea about that," Thomas said. "The community's having their hurricane preparedness party next weekend. Black tie, all the neighbors, business associates. Jason never misses it." "Public humiliation?" Stephen nodded approvingly. "Effective, but we need to ensure it's legal, documented, and irrefutable. No room for claims of defamation or harassment." They spent 3 hours planning every detail. Stephen would prepare the divorce papers and asset freeze orders. Rick would ensure comprehensive documentation of the party itself. Samuel would handle the technical aspects: audio, visual displays. "One more thing," Thomas said as they concluded. "I want to destabilize them first, make them paranoid, sloppy." Stephen's eyes glinted. "Psychological warfare. Not my official recommendation, of course. But if you were to, say, send anonymous messages suggesting Jason's other business partners are asking questions." Thomas was already ahead of him. That afternoon, from an internet cafe, he created a throwaway email account. The message to Hannah was simple. "Jason is using you for information about Sunshine Shores. He's planning to cut you out too once he gets what he needs. Check his files on the Murphy deal. You're not the only one he's deceiving." He sent similar messages to 2 of Jason's investors, hinting at financial irregularities. Not enough to prove anything, just enough to make them nervous, ask questions. By evening, Rick reported back, "You lit a fire. Hannah and Jason met at the condo, major argument. She was crying, he was shouting, couldn't get clear audio, but she definitely confronted him about something." "Good. Let them turn on each other." Thomas returned to his motel room feeling something he hadn't experienced in days. Control. They'd stolen his trust, his peace, his belief in love. But they'd made a crucial error. They'd underestimated him. He opened his laptop and began drafting a speech for the hurricane party. It would be short, devastating, and backed by so much evidence that no one could question its truth. Hannah wanted him dead for the insurance money? She was about to learn there were worse fates than death. There was social death, financial death, the complete and utter destruction of everything she'd schemed to steal. Thomas smiled, remembering something his father used to say. "Son, when someone shows you who they really are, believe them. Then show them who you really are. Saturday couldn't come soon enough. The law offices of Frost & Associates occupied a corner suite in downtown Sarasota's most prestigious building. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the bay, where million-dollar yachts bobbed like toys in the marina. Thomas sat in the waiting area, watching the water sparkle under the morning sun, feeling oddly detached from the wealth it represented. "Mr. Thomas? Mr. Frost will see you now." Stephen Frost's office was a shrine to legal victories. Framed newspaper clippings lined one-wall headlines screaming about record-breaking settlements and corporate titans brought low. The man himself stood behind a mahogany desk that probably cost more than most people's cars. "Thomas." Stephen extended a hand, his grip firm and brief. "Sam filled me in on the basics. Ugly business. Sit." Thomas sat, placing a leather portfolio on the desk between them. "Everything's in here. Photos, recordings, financial records. You need to destroy them." Stephen's eyes were gray as winter steel. "Legally, comprehensively, permanently." He opened the portfolio, scanning the contents with practiced efficiency. "Jesus, they actually discussed your life insurance? Increased it 6 months ago. Hannah's idea. Said we needed better coverage with the real estate market getting volatile." Stephen's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Volatile. That's one word for it." He pulled out the photos from Rick's surveillance, studying them with clinical detachment. "This is good work. Clean, time-stamped, irrefutable. Your PI knows his business. Rick Morrison, ex-cop. I know Rick. Testified for me in the Pemberton divorce. Man's a bloodhound." Stephen set the photos aside and focused on the financial documents. "These withdrawals. She's been bleeding you slowly. Death by 1,000 cuts. Smart if she hadn't gotten greedy. 20,000 in 3 months. That we know of." Stephen's fingers drummed on the desk. "Here's what's going to happen. First, we protect your assets immediately. I'll file emergency motions this afternoon citing financial malfeasance and marital waste. Every account gets frozen until a judge sorts this out." "What about the house?" "You have options. We can seek exclusive possession based on her behavior, or..." Stephen's smile turned predatory. "We can let her keep it for now. Give her enough rope." Thomas leaned forward. "Explain." "Right now she thinks she's winning. You've vanished. She's got the house, probably already measuring for new curtains. But every day she stays there, every utility bill, every mortgage payment, it's all documented. When we get to court, we show a pattern. She wanted you dead for the money but was happy to live off your success. Judges hate that. And Jason," Stephen's expression darkened. "That's where this gets interesting. Corporate espionage is a federal crime. If he's used insider information from your wife to manipulate the Sunshine Shores deal..." He pulled out a legal pad, began making notes. "We'll need more evidence. Specific communications about the project. Proof he acted on information only you would have. Rick's working on it." "Good. Now let's talk strategy." Stephen set down his pen, fixed Thomas with that steel-gray stare. "You could file for divorce today. Take your evidence to court, let the system grind them down. It would work. You'd win. But it would be slow, expensive, and they'd have time to hide assets, destroy evidence, craft their own narrative." Stephen leaned back. "There's another way. Faster, more, decisive." Thomas knew what was coming. He'd thought of little else for days. The hurricane party. Public humiliation is a powerful tool. In a small community like yours, reputation is currency. Destroy that, and everything else follows. Stephen pulled out a fresh legal pad. "But we do this right. No defamation claims, no harassment charges. Every word you say needs to be demonstrably true. Every piece of evidence legally obtained." They spent the next 2 hours crafting a plan with surgical precision. Stephen would prepare the divorce filing, but hold it until after the party. Asset freezes would be filed Monday morning, giving Hannah no time to react. Jason would receive his own surprise a cease and desist regarding the Sunshine Shores project, followed by a civil suit. "One more thing," Thomas said as they wrapped up. "I want to rattle them first, make them nervous." Stephen's expression was carefully neutral. "I can't advise you to contact them. Not directly. But if someone were to send anonymous messages suggesting their scheme was known, Hypothetically speaking, such messages would need to be carefully worded. No threats, nothing that could be traced back to you. Stephen stood, walked to his window. If I were writing fiction, I might have a character send emails from a public computer using a VPN suggesting that certain investors were asking questions about irregularities. Thomas stood as well. Thank you, Stephen. Don't thank me yet. This is going to get ugly. Hannah won't go quietly. And Jason has resources. Are you prepared for that? Thomas thought of the recording, Hannah's voice dripping with contempt as she wished him dead. They started this war. I'm just finishing it. Stephen nodded slowly. Then God help them, because I certainly won't. As Thomas left the office, he felt the shape of his revenge crystallizing. Stephen Frost was more than a lawyer, he was an architect of destruction, and together they would build something magnificent from the ruins of his marriage. The elevator descended toward the lobby, toward the next phase of his plan. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Hurricane season was starting early this year. Thomas's fingers moved across the laptop keyboard with mechanical precision. First National Bank's website loaded, the familiar login screen a gateway to financial warfare. He entered his credentials, navigating to the joint accounts he'd shared with Hannah for 5 years. $73,000 in checking, $112,000 in savings, half was legally his. The wire transfer forms filled quickly. By the time Hannah woke up tomorrow, she'd find their joint account significantly lighter. Thomas felt no guilt. Stephen had been clear. Florida law allowed either spouse to withdraw up to half of joint funds. He was simply protecting what was his. His phone buzzed. Sam. It's done. His brother's voice was tight with controlled anger. Moved your entire investment portfolio to Meridian Securities. New account, your name only. Hannah has no access. How much? $342,000 in change. Your Tesla stock alone is worth a fortune. A pause. Tom, I found something else. Credit card statements. She opened 3 new cards in the last 6 months. All maxed out. Thomas closed his eyes. Another betrayal, another lie. How much debt? Nearly $30,000. Purchases at Neiman Marcus, Tiffany's, hotels in Miami. Sam's voice dropped. The Ritz-Carlton charges match dates when she told you she was visiting her mother in Tampa. Screenshot everything. Send it to Stephen. Already did. Tom, Mom called. She knows something's wrong. Evelyn. His mother had never warmed to Hannah, had pulled him aside at the wedding to ask if he was sure. He'd laughed it off then, too drunk on love to see the warning signs. I'll call her. She's flying down from Chicago. Said she'll be here tomorrow. Sam, no. I don't want. Try stopping her. You know how she gets. Thomas did know. Evelyn Thomas was 5 feet of concentrated determination, a woman who'd raised 2 boys alone after their father's death and built her own successful catering business from nothing. She'd eat Hannah alive. After ending the call, Thomas dialed his mother. She answered on the first ring. Don't you dare tell me not to come. Evelyn's voice was steel wrapped in maternal concern. Samuel told me enough. That woman. I knew it. I always knew it. Mom, you're staying at some fleabag motel, aren't you? Eating gas station food, looking like death warmed over? Thomas glanced around his sparse room at the Comfort Inn. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're planning something. I can hear it in your voice. A pause. Good. It's about time you showed some backbone with that woman. Your father would have... She stopped herself. I'll be at Sam's house tomorrow. We'll talk then. The call ended before he could protest. Thomas smiled despite himself. Hurricane Evelyn was about to make landfall. He returned to his laptop, opening a new browser in incognito mode. The VPN connected through servers in Sweden, then Japan, finally emerging in Brazil. Untraceable. He created a new email account, truthinsunshine@protonmail.com. The first email was to Hannah. Subject: He knows Jason is playing you. Check his files on the Murphy deal. He's already preparing to cut you out once he secures the Sunshine Shores property. You're not his first mistress, and you won't be his last. Don't trust him. The second went to Robert Murphy, Jason's biggest investor. Subject: Due diligence concerns. You might want to review the Sunshine Shores financial projections Jason provided. Compare them to the actual development costs. The discrepancies are interesting. Also, ask him about the inspector bribes. Paper trails have a way of surfacing. Thomas sent both emails, then immediately deleted the account. Let them stew on that. His burner phone rang. Rick. You stirred the hornet's nest. The PI's voice was amused. Hannah just tore out of your house like her ass was on fire, drove straight to Jason's condo. And shouting match. Couldn't get close enough for audio, but body language was crystal clear. She was waving her phone around, pointing at him. He kept trying to calm her down, but she wasn't having it. Good. Paranoid people make mistakes. Speaking of mistakes, Jason's getting sloppy. Met with Craig Donner yesterday, you know. The building inspector who suddenly approved those questionable permits last month. Handed him an envelope in broad daylight. Got photos. Thomas felt a surge of satisfaction. Craig Donner was notoriously corrupt, but usually smart enough to cover his tracks. Jason must be desperate to move so openly. There's more, Rick continued. Your wife met with a lawyer today, David Brennan. Thomas knew the name. Brennan was a bottom feeder who specialized in quick divorces and dubious personal injury claims. Let me guess she wants to file first. Probably. But here's the interesting part. She left his office looking pissed. My guess? He told her she needs grounds, and abandonment takes a year in Florida. While adultery is immediate grounds for filing, Thomas finished, with financial misconduct as the cherry on top. Exactly. You've got her boxed in, and she knows it. After Rick hung up, Thomas sat back and surveyed his mental chessboard. Pieces were moving exactly as planned. Hannah was panicking, Jason was exposed, and the hurricane party was only days away. His phone buzzed with a text from Sam. Michelle just called our house screaming about you harassing Hannah. I told her to fuck off. Clara recorded the whole call. Thomas smiled. Michelle, the toxic sister, the poison dripping in Hannah's ear. She'd been part of this from the beginning, enabling and encouraging. At the party, she'd face her own reckoning. He pulled out a legal pad and began writing his speech for Saturday. It had to be perfect, every word measured, every accusation backed by evidence. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice, served cold and in public. The storm was coming, and Thomas would be its architect. The Pelican Bay Country Club stood like a monument to coastal wealth, its white columns and manicured grounds defying the gray skies above. Hurricane Cassandra was still 3 days out, tracking toward the Gulf, but the community had decided to proceed with their annual preparedness party half-charity fundraiser, half-social event of the season. Thomas sat in his BMW across the street, watching the catering trucks arrive. In 12 hours, this pristine setting would become his theater of war. His phone rang. Sam. Technical setup is complete, his brother reported. I've got remote access to the club's AV system. Tested everything twice, audio, projection, the works. When you give the signal, I can have your laptop displaying on every screen in the ballroom within seconds. Security? Rick has 2 guys on the inside. One is a valet, one is catering staff. They'll be recording everything, multiple angles. If things get physical, they'll intervene. They won't. Jason's too image-conscious to throw punches in public, and Hannah. Thomas paused. She'll try to run. Make sure the valet has her car keys. Cold, brother. Necessary. Thomas drove to a nearby parking garage and met Stephen in his Mercedes. The lawyer looked impeccable as always, briefcase in hand. Final preparations, Stephen said, handing over a folder. Divorce papers ready for service, asset freeze orders, filed but not yet activated. And this, he produced a second document. Cease and desist for Jason regarding Sunshine Shores with a civil suit attached for corporate espionage and fraud. What's our exposure? Minimal. Every accusation is backed by evidence. The recordings are legal under Florida's one-party consent law. The financial documents are from accounts bearing your name. Stephen's smile was sharp. If anything, we're being conservative. I could have pushed for criminal charges. Save those for later. I want him to twist in the wind first. Stephen nodded approvingly. Now, about your speech. Remember factual statements only. No speculation, no embellishment. Let the evidence speak. I've practiced it 50 times. Practice it again. This kind of public confrontation can go sideways fast. Stay calm, stay focused, And whatever happens, don't touch anyone. The moment you throw a punch, you become the villain. They reviewed the plan once more. Thomas would arrive at 8:30 after the party was in full swing. Sam would be in position with the technical setup. Rick and his team would document everything. Stephen would wait in the parking lot, ready to serve papers the moment the revelation concluded. "One last thing," Stephen said. "I did some digging on Jason's finances. He's leveraged to the hilt borrowed heavily to buy into Sunshine Shores, using projections that assumed he'd control your share. If this deal falls apart, he's ruined. Spectacularly. The man will be lucky to keep his car." After Stephen left, Thomas drove to the cemetery where his father was buried. He needed clarity, the kind that only came from confronting the past. The headstone was simple. Marcus Thomas Sr., 195-21998. Husband, father, fighter. "Hey, Dad," Thomas said quietly, kneeling by the grave. "I know what you'd say. You'd tell me to be the bigger man, to walk away clean, but they tried to destroy me. They wanted me dead." The wind picked up, rustling through the Spanish moss overhead. Thomas thought of all the lessons his father had taught him about honor, integrity, hard work. But there'd been another lesson, usually delivered with a wry smile. "Son, sometimes the high road is closed for construction. When that happens, you take whatever path gets you home." Thomas placed a hand on the headstone. "I'm not becoming them, Dad, but I'm not letting them win either. I hope you understand." Back at his motel, Thomas made final preparations. He pressed his charcoal suit, the same one he'd worn to close the biggest deal of his career last year. Appropriate, since tonight would be another kind of closing. His burner phone buzzed. A text from Rick. "Interesting development. Jason just had a screaming match with Robert Murphy in the country club parking lot. Murphy looked ready to kill him. Whatever you sent worked." Another text. This one from Sam. "Hannah's been calling everyone, trying to track you down. Even called your old college roommate. She's desperate." Good. Desperate people revealed their true selves. As evening approached, Thomas sent one final email from a fresh anonymous account, this time to Hannah. Subject: Last chance. He's planning to humiliate you at the party tonight. Has documents showing you've been stealing. Claims you said things about wanting T dead. Get out now while you can. A friend. It was a calculated risk. She might not show up, robbing him of his moment. But Thomas knew Hannah's pride. She'd never run from a fight, especially not in front of their social circle. She'd come, armed with denials and crocodile tears, ready to play the wounded wife. She had no idea what was waiting for her. Thomas looked at himself in the motel mirror. The man staring back wasn't the naive husband who'd driven through a snowstorm with birthday cake and pearls. This was someone harder, sharper, forged in the fire of betrayal. "Time to show them who I really am," he said to his reflection. The clock showed 7:45 p.m. The stage was set, the actors in position, the audience gathering. Hurricane Cassandra wasn't the only storm heading for Sarasota tonight. Rick's voice crackled through the phone, barely containing his excitement. "You're not going to believe this. The anonymous email worked better than we hoped." Thomas sat in his car outside the country club, watching guests arrive in their evening wear. "Tell me." "Hannah met Jason at the condo an hour ago. Major blowout. I was set up in the parking structure with the parabolic mic, got everything crystal clear." "Play it." The recording started with a door slamming. Hannah's voice, shrill with panic. "What documents? What the fuck did you do, Jason?" "Calm down. Don't tell me to calm down. Someone knows. They know about the money, about what I said." A sharp intake of breath. "Oh God, the night of my birthday, what if he was already home? What if he heard, 'You're being paranoid'?" Jason's voice, trying for soothing but edged with irritation. "Thomas is too much of a pussy to do anything even if he knows. We stick to the plan." "The plan? The plan is fucked. Robert Murphy cornered me at the gas station asking about Sunshine Shores projections. He mentioned bribes, Jason. Bribes." A pause. Then Jason's voice, colder now. "What exactly did you tell Thomas about the Murphy deal?" "Everything you asked me to. The numbers, the timeline." Another pause. "You son of a bitch. You're setting me up." "Don't be dramatic." "Dramatic? You used me to get information, and now that it's going bad, you're going to pin it on me? The sound of glass breaking. Jason cursing. Then his voice, ugly with rage. Fine. Yes, I needed the information to secure my position. But you benefited too, didn't you? Shopping sprees, vacations, that condo in Miami you think I don't know about? I earned that. Do you know what it's like pretending to love him? Letting him touch me? You deserve exactly what you're getting. When he finds out you've been wishing him dead, he'll give you anything to get rid of you. Then we both win. The recording ended. Thomas sat in silence, absorbing the final confirmation of their mutual betrayal. They weren't even loyal to each other. That's your smoking gun, Rick said. Clear admission of corporate espionage, conspiracy, and Jesus, Tom. The stuff about her pretending. I'm sorry. Don't be. It's perfect. Thomas checked his watch. 8:15. Are your men in position? Affirmative. Hannah just arrived wearing a red dress that probably cost more than my car. Trying to look calm, but she's gulping champagne like water. Jason's holding court near the bar, but he keeps checking his phone. And Michelle, attached to Hannah's hip, whispering in her ear, classic enabler behavior. Good. I'm coming in. Thomas stepped out of his BMW, straightening his tie. The valet, one of Rick's men, took his keys with a professional nod. The country club's entrance was grand as always, torches flickering in the gathering wind. Inside, the ballroom was awash in false cheer. Hurricane preparedness banners competed with twinkling lights, while Sarasota's elite mingled in their finest clothes, pretending the storm warnings didn't exist. How appropriate. Thomas moved through the crowd like a ghost, noting familiar faces. There was Dr. Patel, who'd treated his broken arm 3 years ago. Linda Morrison from the library fundraising committee. Judge Whitman, whose grandson Thomas had tutored in math. And there, near the champagne fountain, Hannah in her scarlet dress. She looked beautiful. Thomas felt nothing. He circled wide, keeping to the edges of the room. Sam appeared at his elbow, dressed in catering staff uniform. Everything's ready, his brother murmured. Just say when. Soon. Let them get comfortable first. Thomas positioned himself where he could observe without being seen. Hannah was performing beautifully, laughing at jokes, touching arms, playing the gracious wife. Only the white knuckles gripping her champagne flute betrayed her anxiety. Jason worked the opposite side of the room, glad-handing potential investors. But his eyes kept darting to Hannah, then the exits. They were both wound tight as piano wire. At 8:45, the crowd had swelled to nearly 200 people. Perfect. Thomas pulled out his phone and sent a single text to Sam. Now. He moved toward the AV system as the lights flickered once, twice. People laughed nervously, making hurricane jokes. Thomas picked up the wireless microphone from its stand. Good evening, everyone. Conversations died. Heads turned. Hannah's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. Thomas stood in the spotlight, calm as a frozen lake. I apologize for interrupting your evening, but I believe it's time we discussed a different kind of storm, one that's been brewing in our community for months. Thomas! Jason's voice boomed across the room, fake jovial. There you are! We've been worried sick! Save it, Jason! Thomas's voice cut through the pretense like a blade. We both know exactly why you've been worried. The room held its breath. This wasn't how things were done in their polite society. Scandals were whispered about, not announced. Thomas smiled coldly. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a story to tell you. A story about trust, betrayal, and what people will do for money. And I have evidence documented, recorded, irrefutable evidence to support every word. Hannah started moving toward him, but Rick's man stepped smoothly into her path, ostensibly cleaning up the broken glass. She was trapped. Shall we begin? Thomas asked the silent room. It started on a snowy night 3 weeks ago, my wife's birthday. The storm had arrived, and Thomas was its voice. Earlier that evening, before Thomas arrived, the Pelican Bay Country Club hummed with nervous energy. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows on worried faces as the party guests tried to ignore the wind rattling the windows. Hurricane Cassandra was still offshore, but her presence loomed like an uninvited guest. Hannah stood near the champagne fountain, her scarlet dress a splash of defiance against the storm's gray mood. She'd chosen it carefully, the neckline just low enough to remind everyone what Thomas was missing, the fit perfect enough to show she wasn't falling apart, even if she was. "Stop fidgeting," Michelle hissed beside her, adjusting the diamond bracelet on her sister's wrist. "You look guilty." "I look concerned. There's a difference." Hannah grabbed another champagne flute from a passing waiter, her fourth of the evening. "My husband's been missing for 3 weeks. People expect me to look worried." "Well, don't overdo it. You were practically glowing when you walked in with Jason." Hannah's jaw tightened. Across the room, Jason worked the crowd with practiced ease, his 1,000-watt smile never faltering. But she'd seen the tightness around his eyes, the way he kept checking his phone. That anonymous email had shaken him more than he'd admitted. Mrs. Thomas. Dorothy Whitman, the judge's wife, materialized at Hannah's elbow. "Any word from Thomas? We're all so concerned." Hannah arranged her face into a mask of brave suffering. "Nothing yet. The police say there's no sign of anything bad, but it's so unlike him to just vanish." "Men," Dorothy clucked sympathetically. "Sometimes they just need space. I'm sure he'll turn up with his tail between his legs." If only she knew, Hannah thought, draining her champagne. Thomas with his tail between his legs was exactly what she needed. Docile, apologetic, ready to sign whatever papers she put in front of him. The ballroom was filling up now. She recognized most Face's neighbors from their gated community, Thomas's business associates, country club members who'd known them for years. The storm had everyone on edge, but nobody wanted to miss the social event of hurricane season. "Hannah, darling!" Robert Murphy's voice boomed across the room. Jason's biggest investor looked like a man who'd been drinking since noon. His face was flushed, his movements slightly unsteady. "Where's that husband of yours? Still playing hide and seek?" "Robert." Jason appeared smoothly at Murphy's side, hand on the older man's shoulder. "Let's not bother Hannah with, 'Don't touch me.'" Murphy shrugged him off violently. "You think I'm stupid? Think I don't know what you've been up to?" The conversation around them stuttered to a halt. Hannah felt ice form in her stomach. "Robert, you're drunk," Jason said quietly, but his smile had turned brittle. "Let's discuss this tomorrow." "Tomorrow? Like you were going to tell me tomorrow about the real Sunshine Shores numbers? Or tomorrow about the bribes?" Murphy's voice rose with each word. "Someone sent me some very interesting information about you, boy." Security was already moving in, 2 discreet men in dark suits. Murphy allowed himself to be led away, but not before pointing a shaking finger at Jason. "You're done! You hear me? Done!" The party resumed its rhythm, but whispers rippled through the crowd like wind on water. Hannah saw the way people looked at Jason now, speculation replacing respect. Her chest tightened with panic. "What the hell was that about?" she whispered fiercely, when Jason returned to her side. "Nothing. Murphy's been drinking. Storm has everyone paranoid." But sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the air conditioning. The email was right, wasn't it? "You are planning to cut me out." "Not here," Jason growled, his public smile never wavering. "We'll discuss this later. We'll discuss it now." The lights flickered. Once, twice. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Someone made a joke about hoping the generators were working. The band continued playing, though the music seemed thin against the sound of wind battering the windows. That's when Thomas walked in. The reaction was immediate, visceral. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned as if pulled by invisible strings. Hannah's champagne glass slipped from nerveless fingers, exploding against the marble in a shower of crystal and gold. He looked different. The Thomas she'd married would have been disheveled after 3 weeks, would have shown the strain. This Thomas stood straight-backed in his charcoal suit, every line perfect, every hair in place. His face was calm as carved stone. "Thomas." Jason's voice cracked the silence like a whip. He strode forward, arms spread wide, playing the concerned friend to the hilt. "Thank God you're all right." "We've been worried sick. Save it, Jason." The words were quiet, but they carried. Thomas walked past Jason without a glance, moving toward the AV system where a young man in catering whites his brother Samuel, Hannah realized with a jolt, stood ready. "No," she breathed. This wasn't happening. Not here. Not in front of everyone. She started forward, but her heel caught in the puddle of champagne. Someone steadied her, one of the waiters, cleaning up the mess with remarkable efficiency. By the time she regained her balance, Thomas had the microphone. "Good evening, everyone." His voice filled the ballroom, calm and measured. This wasn't the man who'd stutter through birthday toasts, who hated public speaking. This was someone else wearing her husband's face. "I apologize for interrupting your evening, but I believe it's time we discussed a different kind of storm, one that's been brewing in our community for months." Hannah's heart hammered against her ribs. Run. Every instinct screamed, "Get out now!" But she was frozen, trapped between the watching crowd and the man she'd tried to destroy. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thomas continued, his eyes finding hers across the room, "I have a story to tell you. A story about trust, betrayal, and what people will do for money. And I have evidence documented, recorded, irrefutable evidence to support every word." The ballroom held its breath. Outside, the wind howled its approval. "Shall we begin? It started on a snowy night 3 weeks ago. My wife's birthday." Thomas's voice carried through the ballroom with devastating clarity. "I drove 9 hours through a blizzard in Florida, if you can believe it, to make it home by midnight. I had a cake from Atlanta's finest bakery and a pearl necklace she'd been admiring." He paused, letting the image sink in. "I wanted to surprise her." The crowd leaned in, sensing blood in the water. Hannah stood frozen, her scarlet dress now seeming like a target painted on her chest. Instead, I was the one surprised. Thomas's tone remained conversational, which somehow made it worse. "I heard my wife's voice from the living room, clear as day. Would you like to know what she said?" "Thomas, stop this." Hannah's voice cracked across the space. "You're not well. You need help. What I need, Hannah, is for people to know the truth." He nodded to Samuel, who pressed a button on the laptop. Hannah's voice filled the ballroom, crystal clear through the speakers. "God, I really hope he gets into an accident and dies on the way home. The insurance money would set me free. I can't stand pretending to love that boring bastard for one more day." Gasps rippled through the crowd like dominoes falling. Someone dropped a glass. Someone else whispered, "Dear God." Michelle's recorded laugh followed, sharp and cruel. "Or at least a few months of peace without having to hear him drone on about work and money. You deserve better than that, honey. Jason would give you the life you've always dreamed of." Thomas watched Hannah's face drain of color, watched Michelle shrink back against the wall. That was the moment my marriage ended. Not with papers or lawyers, but with my wife wishing me dead for money. "It's fake!" Hannah's voice rose to a shriek. "He's making this up! That's not—" "Should we discuss the financial records next?" Thomas clicked a remote, and the large screen behind him lit up with bank statements. $20,000 in cash withdrawals over 3 months. Charges at hotels when you claim to be visiting your mother. Shopping sprees funded by our joint account while you plan my demise. The evidence scrolled past irrefutable damning. Date after date, transaction after transaction. The crowd murmured, a sound like angry bees. But the betrayal goes deeper. Thomas's eyes found Jason, who stood rigid near the bar. "My business partner, my friend of 10 years, has been having an affair with my wife for at least 4 months. Samuel clicked again. Photos filled the screen, Hannah and Jason at the secret condo, kissing on the balcony, walking hand in hand on a Key West beach. The images were sharp, professional, undeniable. That's an invasion of privacy," Jason sputtered, his smooth facade finally cracking. "Is it?" Thomas smiled coldly. "As invasive as using my wife to steal corporate information? As invasive as planning to force me out of our joint venture using insider knowledge?" Another click. Another recording. This time, Jason's voice, ugly with greed. "Fine. Yes, I needed the information to secure my position. But you benefited too, didn't you?" Hannah's recorded response was worse. "I earned that. Do you know what it's like pretending to love him? Letting him touch me?" A woman near the champagne fountain made a sound of disgust. Others were already moving away from Hannah and Jason, creating a circle of empty space around them like they carried a disease. "But here's my favorite part," Thomas continued, his voice hardening. "When I sent anonymous warnings to see how deep this went, they turned on each other immediately. Just this afternoon, in fact. The final recording played. Jason admitting to using Hannah. Hannah accusing him of planning to cut her out. Their partnership dissolving into mutual accusations and threats. "When he finds out you've been wishing him dead," Jason's recorded voice sneered, "he'll give you anything to get rid of you." Thomas set down the microphone carefully, letting the silence stretch. The only sounds were the wind outside and Hannah's ragged breathing. "I could have handled this privately," he said finally. "But you didn't just betray me. You betrayed this community's trust. Jason's been bribing inspectors, falsifying reports, using your investments for fraud." He looked directly at the gathered investors. "You deserve to know where your money was really going. You bastard." Hannah lunged forward, but her heels betrayed her again. She stumbled, caught herself on a chair. "You've ruined everything." "No, Hannah. You ruined everything the moment you decided my life was worth less than an insurance payout. I'll sue you for defamation." Jason's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. "This is slander. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation," a calm voice said from the doorway. Stephen Frost entered the ballroom like a shark sliding through still water. "And my client has extensive documentation for every claim made tonight." The lawyer moved through the crowd with practiced ease, arriving at Hannah's side just as she seemed about to collapse. He handed her an envelope with clinical detachment. "Divorce papers, Mrs. Thomas, and a restraining order preventing you from accessing any joint assets pending investigation of financial fraud. You'll find the terms quite specific." He turned to Jason, producing another envelope. "And for you, Mr. Garrett, cease and desist regarding Sunshine Shores, plus notice of civil action for corporate espionage and fraud. Criminal charges may follow pending the state attorney's review." The room erupted. Investors surrounded Jason, voices raised in anger. Someone was already on the phone with their lawyer. The society matrons clustered in groups, whispers flying like arrows. "You planned this," Hannah said, her voice hollow. "You planned all of this." Thomas looked at her, really looked at her for the last time. The beautiful face that had once made his heart race now seemed like a stranger's mask. "I planned nothing. I simply revealed the truth. The consequences are your own making." He turned and walked toward the exit, passing through the crowd that parted like the Red Sea. Behind him, Hannah's world collapsed in real-time, friends turning away. Jason being cornered by furious investors, Michelle trying to slink out unnoticed only to be confronted by other wives who'd heard her recorded poison. The storm had broken, and the casualties littered the ballroom floor. "Liar! You're a fucking liar!" Hannah's scream cut through the ballroom like a rusty blade. She grabbed a champagne bottle from a nearby table and hurled it at the projection screen, where her affair photos still glowed. The bottle exploded in a shower of green glass and foam, but the images remained, mocking her fury. "Hannah, stop!" Michelle tried to grab her sister's arm, but Hannah whirled on her with wild eyes. "This is your fault. You told me to do it. You said I deserved better." "I never told you to fuck his business partner," Michelle shot back, her own composure cracking. "That was all you." Rick Morrison and another man, both revealed now as security, not waitstaff, moved smoothly to position themselves between the warring sisters in the crowd. Several guests had their phones out, recording every second of the meltdown. Jason, meanwhile, was drowning in a sea of angry investors. Robert Murphy had returned, stone-cold sober now, pointing a finger in Jason's face. $3 million I put into Sunshine Shores based on your projections. Were any of them real? The project is sound. The project is built on lies and bribes. Another investor, Harold Chen, pushed forward. My lawyers will have your assets frozen by morning. You can't prove anything from some jealous husband's accusations. We just heard you admit it, you moron. Murphy's face was purple with rage. Your own words talking about using his wife for information. Across the room, the social aftermath was equally brutal. Dorothy Whitman, who'd been so sympathetic to Hannah earlier, now stood with a group of other society wives, their faces twisted with disgust. To think we invited her to our homes, Dorothy said, loud enough to carry. Sat with her at charity functions while she was planning to murder her husband. I didn't plan to murder anyone, Hannah screamed, mascara streaming down her cheeks. It was just talk, just stupid talk. Talk about insurance money? Another woman, Linda Patterson, whose husband ran the largest bank in Sarasota, stepped forward. "My God, Hannah, we played tennis together. Our children had playdates, and all this time." The community president, George Hartwell, approached with 2 security guards. His usually jovial face was stern, professional. "Mrs. Thomas, Mr. Garrett, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. This is a private club, and your membership privileges are under review effective immediately." "You can't kick me out!" Hannah's voice cracked. "I've been a member for 5 years." "Actions have consequences," George replied coldly. "Please leave voluntarily, or I'll have you escorted out." Stephen Frost observed the chaos with clinical detachment, occasionally making notes on his phone. When Michelle tried to approach him, presumably to negotiate for her sister, he held up a hand. "Any communication needs to go through Mrs. Thomas's attorney. I'd suggest she retain one immediately, a good one. She'll need it." "This is entrapment!" Jason shouted over the crowd besieging him. "He set us up!" "No one forced you to have an affair," Stephen replied smoothly. "No one forced you to engage in corporate espionage or bribe city officials. My client simply documented your choices." Samuel had begun packing up the AV equipment, but the damage was done. Even without the visual aids, the story spread through the crowd like wildfire. Phone calls were being made, texts flying to those who hadn't attended. By morning, every person in their social circle would know. "Where is he?" Hannah spun wildly, searching for Thomas. "Where did that coward go?" "He left," Rick informed her, "and I'd advise against trying to follow. The restraining order is already in effect." "Restraining order? He can't? I'm his wife?" "For now," Stephen interjected. "Though given the evidence of financial fraud and your recorded statements about hoping for his death, I doubt that status will last long." A new commotion erupted near Jason. One of his investors had grabbed him by the lapels, shaking him like a terrier with a rat. "20 years I've known you. 20 years of deals, and this is how you repay my trust." Security intervened, but the damage to Jason's expensive suit and his reputation was complete. His perfect hair was disheveled, his tie askew, the golden boy finally revealed as fool's gold. "I'm calling the police," Jason threatened, pulling out his phone with shaking hands. "This is assault, defamation." "Please do," Stephen said mildly. "I'm sure they'd be very interested in the evidence of bribery and fraud we've collected. In fact, I believe the state attorney's office is already preparing a case." Jason's face went white. The phone slipped from his fingers, clattering on the marble floor. Hannah had collapsed into a chair, sobbing theatrically. But no one moved to comfort her. The women who might once have offered sympathy now stood in judgmental clusters, their whispers like poison darts. "She'll have to leave town," someone murmured. "Leave the state, more likely." "Did you hear what she said about letting him touch her? While she was sleeping with that Mrs. Thomas." George Hartwell returned with his security detail. "I must insist you leave now." "You leave. Your sister as well." Michelle helped Hannah to her feet, both women looking like they'd aged a decade in 20 minutes. As they were escorted toward the exit, Hannah turned back one last time, her tear-streaked face ugly with rage. "He'll pay for this," she hissed. "I'll make him pay." "I believe he already has," Stephen observed. "The only payment remaining is yours." The security team efficiently guided them out as the crowd parted, no one willing to be contaminated by association. Jason followed minutes later, flanked by his own escort, his phone ringing incessantly with what were undoubtedly lawyers and panicked business partners. Inside the ballroom, the hurricane party continued, but the atmosphere had changed completely. The storm inside had been more devastating than anything nature was bringing their way. Conversations buzzed with shock, condemnation, and for some a guilty thrill at witnessing such spectacular social destruction. Stephen Frost surveyed the wreckage with satisfaction before heading for the exit himself. His work here was done. The legal battles would come later, but the war was already won. Outside, the wind howled its approval, and the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. Thomas stood in the parking lot, rain beginning to pelt his suit. He didn't move, didn't seek shelter. After 3 weeks of careful planning, calculated moves, and suppressed emotion, he finally allowed himself to feel. The pain hit like a physical blow. 5 years of marriage, reduced to a sordid tale of greed and betrayal. The woman he'd loved, had built a life with, had wanted him dead for money. The rain mixed with something hot on his cheeks, tears or rage, he couldn't tell. Tom. Samuel appeared beside him, jacket held over both their heads. Come on, let's get out of here. Is it done? Completely. I saved everything to multiple drives. Rick's got video of the whole thing from 3 angles. It's over, brother. Over. Such a simple word for such a complex destruction. They walked to Thomas's BMW, where Rick waited in his own car, engine running. The private investigator rolled down his window. You did good in there, Rick said. Clean, professional. No physical contact, no threats, just truth. What happens now? Now? Now they scramble. Hannah will try to find a lawyer who'll take her case, but with that evidence, good luck. Jason's got bigger problems. I already heard 2 of his investors on the phone with the FBI about those bribes. Thomas nodded, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried him through the confrontation was fading, leaving him hollow. There's a suite waiting at the Ritz, Samuel said. Top floor, away from everything. Mom's already there. Mom? Thomas groaned. I told you not to. Try stopping her. She watched the whole thing on the live stream I set up for her. Said she's proud of you, but she's still going to give you hell for staying in that Fleabag motel. Despite everything, Thomas found himself almost smiling. Hurricane Evelyn was a force of nature in her own right. The drive to the hotel was surreal. Wind battered the BMW, rain coming in sheets. Other cars were already pulling off the road. Hurricane Cassandra was making landfall, right on schedule. The metaphor was almost too perfect, the storm in his life coinciding with an actual hurricane. At the Ritz-Carlton, Thomas was whisked to a penthouse suite where his mother waited, all 5 feet of her radiating maternal fury and concern. Don't you ever disappear on me like that again, Evelyn said, pulling him into a fierce hug. I don't care what that witch did to you. I'm fine, Mom. You're not fine. You're soaking wet and you look like death. She pushed him toward the bathroom. Shower, now. There are fresh clothes in there. Thomas didn't argue, miss. Under the hot water, he let the last 3 weeks wash over him. The shock of discovery, the cold planning, the gathering of evidence, the execution. It all seemed like something that had happened to someone else. When he emerged, dressed in dry clothes, Samuel had ordered room service. Stephen Frost had arrived as well, looking satisfied despite the late hour. The papers were served successfully, Stephen reported. Both Hannah and Jason. I've also had confirmation that the asset freeze is in place. She won't be able to touch anything. What about the house? Legally still joint property, but with the restraining order, she can't enter without supervision. I suggest you have the locks changed tomorrow, just to be safe. Outside, the storm was intensifying. The windows rattled in their frames, and they could hear debris hitting the building. The lights flickered but held the hotel's generators kicking in. You know she'll fight, Stephen continued. She'll claim emotional distress, temporary insanity, anything to minimize the damage. Let her. Thomas stared out at the storm. I have the truth. Truth doesn't always win in court, Stephen warned. But with this much evidence, she'll be lucky to walk away with the clothes on her back. They talked through the night as Cassandra raged outside. Legal strategies, next steps, practical matters. But Thomas found his mind drifting to the larger implications. His social life was over, at least in these circles. His business would take a hit from the association with Jason. He'd have to rebuild, start over in many ways. It was worth it, though, his mother said quietly, reading his thoughts as she always had. Living a lie would have killed you slowly. At least now you can heal. Around 3 a.m., the storm reached its peak. The building swayed slightly in the strongest gusts. Somewhere below, they heard glass shatter. The city was taking a beating, but the structure held. Thomas thought about Hannah and Jason wherever they were riding out the storm. Had they found shelter? Were they together, or had their alliance shattered completely? He found he didn't much care. I need to sleep, he said finally. Guest bedrooms made up, Samuel said. I'm staying too. Not leaving you alone tonight. Thomas nodded gratefully. As he lay in the unfamiliar bed listening to Cassandra's fury, he thought about transformation. The storm would pass, leaving destruction in its wake. but also the chance to rebuild, to create something new from the wreckage. His marriage was dead. His old life was over. The man who'd driven through a snowstorm with birthday cake and pearls was gone. But Thomas was still here, damaged, but not broken, ready to see what came after the storm. Outside, Cassandra howled her agreement, and Thomas finally slept the first peaceful sleep in 3 weeks. When he woke, it would be to a new world, scraped clean and ready for whatever came next. The eye of the storm had passed. Now came the reconstruction. 6 months after Hurricane Cassandra tore through Sarasota, Thomas sat in a different kind of storm, the Sarasota County Courthouse, room 403. The November air was crisp, a relief after another sweltering Florida summer. He adjusted his tie, the same charcoal suit he'd worn to the party, now carrying different memories. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Stern. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and eyes that had seen every marital disaster imaginable. She settled behind the bench, reviewing the thick file before her. We're here for the final decree in Thomas versus Thomas, case number 2006 DR 4521. Her voice was businesslike but not unkind. I've reviewed all submitted evidence, including the recordings, financial documents, and testimony. This is one of the most clear-cut cases of marital misconduct I've encountered in 20 years on the bench. Hannah sat at the opposite table, a shadow of her former self. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple black dress from Target. Her lawyer, David Brennan, the only one who'd take her case after the hurricane party debacle, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Your Honor, Brennan stood, straightening his cheap suit. My client maintains that the recorded statements were taken out of context, that she was intoxicated and speaking hyperbolically. Counsel! Judge Stern's voice cut through his protest like a blade. Your client stated, and I quote from the transcript, I really hope he gets into an accident and dies on the way home. The insurance money would set me free. That's not hyperbole. That's a stated desire for her husband's death for financial gain. Stephen Frost remained seated beside Thomas, the picture of calm confidence. He'd barely needed to speak during the proceedings. The evidence spoke volumes. Furthermore, the judge continued, the financial records show systematic depletion of marital assets for the purpose of conducting an extramarital affair. $20,000 in 3 months, Mrs. Thomas. Money that belonged equally to your husband, spent on hotels and gifts for another man. I was unhappy, Hannah's voice cracked. He was never home, always working. Being unhappy doesn't justify theft, adultery, or wishing death upon your spouse, Judge Stern replied coldly. Based on the overwhelming evidence of adultery, financial misconduct, and what I can only describe as malicious intent, I'm granting the divorce with the following distribution. She put on her reading glasses, reviewing her notes. The marital home, valued at $800,000, goes to Mr. Thomas. The joint bank accounts, totaling $135,000 after Mrs. Thomas's withdrawals, go to Mr. Thomas. The investment portfolio, currently valued at $342,000, goes to Mr. Thomas. Hannah made a strangled sound. Brennan put a hand on her shoulder. Mrs. Thomas will retain her personal vehicle, a 2005 Lexus, and her personal belongings. No alimony will be awarded given the circumstances. Additionally, Mrs. Thomas is ordered to repay $16,000 in marital funds improperly spent, to be garnished from future wages if necessary. This is everything, Hannah whispered. You're leaving me with nothing. Judge Stern removed her glasses, fixing Hannah with a stern gaze. You're leaving with your freedom, Mrs. Thomas. Given the recorded statements about insurance money and your husband's death, the state attorney's office declined to pursue criminal charges only because they couldn't prove concrete planning. Consider yourself fortunate. Your Honor, Stephen finally stood. There's also the matter of the Sunshine Shores settlement. Ah, yes. The judge shuffled papers. Mr. Jason Garrett has agreed to transfer his 40% stake in the Sunshine Shores development to Mr. Thomas in exchange for dropping the civil suit regarding corporate espionage. This transfer is valued at approximately $2 million in projected profits. Thomas felt no joy at the number. It was justice, not victory. The divorce is granted, effective immediately. Mrs. Thomas, you have 30 days to vacate the marital home. Any attempt to damage or remove property not specifically awarded to you will result in criminal charges. Judge Stern's gavel came down with finality. This court is adjourned. The courtroom emptied quickly. Hannah stood slowly, as if in a daze. For a moment, their eyes met across the aisle. Thomas saw no remorse there, only rage and self-pity. "You destroyed me," she hissed. "No," Thomas replied quietly. "You destroyed yourself. I just made sure everyone could see it." Brennan ushered her out before she could respond. Stephen gathered his papers with satisfaction. "Clean sweep," he said. "One of the best outcomes I've ever achieved, though frankly, she made it easy with all that evidence." They walked out into the Florida sunshine. The courthouse steps were dotted with people dealing with their own dramas, their own endings and beginnings. "What happens to her now?" Thomas asked, surprising himself with the question. Stephen shrugged. "Not our concern. She'll probably leave the state, try to start over somewhere. Maybe she'll learn from this. Maybe not. Either way, you're free." Free. Thomas tested the word, found it fitting. The man who'd entered that courthouse was leaving unburdened, legally and emotionally severed from the woman who'd wanted him dead. His phone buzzed. A text from Samuel. "Heard the good news. Mom's making your favorite dinner. Don't even think about saying no." Thomas smiled, the first genuine smile in the courthouse all day. He had a family worth keeping, a future worth building, and finally, truly, a past that could no longer hurt him. The storm had passed. The wreckage had been cleared. Now came the rebuilding. The Flamingo Motel on Route 41 was a far cry from the beachfront mansion Hannah had once called home. Peeling pink paint, a cracked neon sign, and the constant roar of traffic, this was her reality now, 3 months after the divorce. She sat on the lumpy bed sorting through job rejection emails on a laptop that was her last valuable possession. "Thank you for your interest, but we've selected another candidate. After careful consideration, we've decided to move forward with other applicants. Your background doesn't align with our current needs." They didn't have to spell it out. Everyone in Sarasota knew her story. The woman who'd wished her husband dead for insurance money. The adulteress caught on tape. Social media had been merciless, the recordings going viral in their small community. Even McDonald's had turned down her application. Her phone rang. Michelle. Hannah almost didn't answer. Their relationship had soured dramatically since the hurricane party. "What do you want?" "Just checking if you're still breathing." Michelle's voice was cold. "Though frankly, I'm not sure why I bother." "Because you helped create this mess." "I told you to leave him, not fuck his business partner and plan his death," Michelle snapped. "Do you know what you've done to my life? Robert filed for divorce, says he can't trust someone married to a woman who'd encourage her sister to murder her husband." "I didn't plan to murder." "Save it. I'm calling to tell you I'm done. Don't contact me again. You're toxic, Hannah. You destroy everything you touch." The line went dead. Hannah threw the phone across the room, watching it shatter against the wall. Another thing she couldn't afford to replace. A knock at the door made her jump. The motel manager, probably. She was 2 weeks behind on rent. But it wasn't the manager. It was Jason, though she barely recognized him. Gone was the golden boy with the 1,000-watt smile. This man was gaunt, unshaven, wearing a wrinkled shirt that had seen better days. "We need to talk," he said, pushing past her into the room. "There's nothing to talk about. You ruined my life." Jason laughed bitterly. "I ruined your life? You destroyed mine. That recording of us, do you know what happened after that party?" He collapsed into the room's only chair, head in his hands. FBI investigation into the bribes, SEC looking into securities fraud, every investor pulling out, suing for their money back. I'm facing 5 to 10 years in federal prison if convicted. That's not my problem. It's exactly your problem. Jason's head snapped up, eyes wild. They want you to testify. Prosecution thinks you were more involved than you were, that you helped plan the corporate espionage. If you don't cooperate, they'll charge you as a co-conspirator. Hannah felt the blood drain from her face. "But I didn't. I just told you things Thomas mentioned, which is conspiracy to commit corporate espionage, federal crime. You think your life is bad now? Try being a convicted felon. They sat in silence, two people who'd destroyed their lives for greed and lust, now facing the consequences. My lawyer says if I plead guilty, provide evidence about the bribes, maybe I get 3 years instead of 10, Jason continued. But I'll be disbarred from any financial industry work. Everything I built, gone. What about the money? You must have hidden something. Frozen. All of it. Every account, every asset. I'm sleeping in my car, Hannah. The golden boy is living in a fucking Honda Civic. Despite everything, Hannah felt a twisted satisfaction. At least she wasn't suffering alone. What do we do? She asked finally. Survive. Jason stood. Separately. This thing between us was poison from the start. We used each other and look where it got us. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, I never loved you. You were just available and useful. The door closed, leaving Hannah alone with the truth. She'd thrown away a life of comfort, a husband who genuinely loved her, for a man who saw her as a tool. The irony was perfect in its cruelty. Her laptop dinged. Another email. This time from a cousin in Ohio. Heard about your situation. I have a spare room and there's a diner here that needs waitresses. It's not much, but it's a fresh start. Let me know. Hannah stared at the email. Ohio, middle of nowhere, waiting tables for tips. It was a lifetime away from the country club life she'd known, but it was better than this motel. Better than the stares and whispers. Better than jail. She began typing her response, each keystroke another step away from the woman who'd wished her husband dead. Maybe in the ruins of her old life, she'd find something resembling redemption, or maybe she'd just find more ways to destroy herself. Time would tell. Across town, Michelle Garrett sat in her empty house, divorce papers spread on the kitchen table. Her husband had been surgical in his removal from her life, taking exactly half of everything, including their dignity. You're toxic, he'd said. Your sister's poison and you're no better. I won't have our children exposed to that. The custody arrangement gave her alternate weekends. Her own children, reduced to visitors in her life because she'd encouraged her sister's worst impulses. She poured another glass of wine, her third of the evening. The house felt like a mausoleum, every room echoing with abandoned dreams. Her phone buzzed. A text from a former friend, really. They'd all distanced themselves after the party. Saw Hannah's ex at the farmer's market. He looked good, happy, building something out in the country. Thought you should know your sister lost the best thing in her life. Michelle deleted the text, drained her wine, and wondered how she'd become this person. The bitter sister, the poisonous influence, the woman drinking alone in an empty house. Outside, Florida life continued sunshine and palm trees and the endless optimism of a place built on swampland. But for the betrayers, there was only the slow, grinding punishment of consequences, served daily with no hope of parole. The real estate agent looked nervous as she pulled up to the beachfront mansion. Thomas understood the house had become infamous in Sarasota, the setting for a marriage that had ended in spectacular destruction. It's a beautiful property, she said carefully, but given the circumstances, we might need to price it competitively. Thomas stood in the driveway, looking at the place he'd once called home. 5 years of memories lurked behind those walls, most of them now revealed as lies. I don't care about maximizing profit, he said. I just want it gone. They walked through the rooms, the agent making notes about staging and improvements. Thomas felt nothing. The master bedroom where he'd discovered Hannah's betrayal, the kitchen where he'd left the birthday cake, the living room where she'd wished him dead, they were just spaces now, drained of power. The market's still hot, the agent continued, even with the bubble showing signs of strain. We list it right. We could have offers within a week. Do it. 3 weeks later, Thomas signed the papers. A young couple from Miami, eager to start their life together in paradise. He hoped they'd have better luck than he had. The check was substantial, even at a reduced price. Combined with the Sunshine Shore's profits and the divorce settlement, Thomas had more money than he'd ever need. But money hadn't bought him happiness before. He wouldn't make that mistake again. Samuel helped him load the truck with the few possessions he wanted to keep. Photo albums from before Hannah, his father's tools, books collected over the years. You sure about this? Samuel asked as they secured the last box. Moving out to the middle of nowhere? It's not nowhere, it's peace. The property Thomas had found was 40 minutes inland, where Florida turned rural and real. 20 acres along the Mayaca River, far from the coastal pretensions and social climbing. The land came with an old farmhouse that needed work and a barn that could be converted into a workshop. "You're really going to become a hermit carpenter?" Samuel tried to joke, but concern colored his voice. "Not a hermit, just selective about who I let in." The drive to the new property was like traveling between worlds. The manicured lawns and gated communities gave way to orange groves and cattle ranches. The air smelled different here, earth and growth instead of salt and ambition. The farmhouse sat on a small rise overlooking the river. It was modest, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a kitchen that hadn't been updated since the 70s. But the bones were solid, the cypress wood floors original, the wraparound porch perfect for watching sunsets. "It needs everything," Samuel observed, testing a squeaky floorboard. "Good. Gives me something to do." They unloaded in companionable silence. As the sun began to set, painting the river gold, Samuel cracked open 2 beers from the cooler. "To new beginnings," he offered, "to learning from the past." They drank, watching an osprey dive for fish in the shallows. The silence here was different from the beach house silence, not empty but full, pregnant with possibility. "I'm proud of you," Samuel said suddenly. "The way you handled everything. Dad would be too." Thomas felt his throat tighten. "I almost lost myself in the anger, almost became like them." "But you didn't. You used the system, played by the rules, let them hang themselves. That takes strength." After Samuel left, Thomas walked his property in the dying light. The previous owner had left an old workshop in the barn, complete with a table saw and lathe. Tomorrow, he'd drive to town, order lumber, begin transforming both the house and himself. His phone rang. Evelyn, checking in as she did every evening since the divorce. "How's the new place?" she asked without preamble. "Quiet? Needs work?" "Good. Idle hands and all that. When can I visit?" "Give me a month. Let me at least get the kitchen functional. I've cooked in worse, but fine, 1 month. Then I'm coming down with a truck full of furniture and opinions." Thomas smiled. His mother's love came armed with suggestions, but it was real, constant, the kind of foundation Hannah had never understood. That night, he slept on a mattress on the floor, windows open to the night sounds, owls, insects, the distant splash of something in the river. No traffic, no neighbors, no ghosts of a marriage built on sand. In the morning, he'd begin the real work, not just renovating a house, but rebuilding himself. The man who'd driven through a snowstorm for love was gone, but maybe something better could be built from his remains. The workshop called to him, tools waiting to shape raw wood into something useful, beautiful, lasting. It was honest work, the kind where lies had no place and the only person you could deceive was yourself. Thomas fell asleep to the sound of the river, flowing steadily toward the Gulf, carrying away what was while bringing what might be. The metaphor was obvious, but sometimes the obvious truths were the ones most worth embracing. Somewhere in Sarasota, his ex-wife was learning the price of betrayal. Somewhere else, Jason faced his own reckoning. But here, in this simple house by the river, Thomas faced only tomorrow, clean and full of possibility. The healing had begun. 6 months into his new life, Thomas had developed a routine. Morning coffee on the porch, watching the mist rise off the river, hours in the workshop crafting furniture, evenings working on the house, each repair an act of meditation. The farmhouse was transforming. New kitchen cabinets he'd built himself, floors refinished to honey gold, the porch rebuilt with cypress that would last another century. But the real transformation was internal, measured in days without thinking about betrayal, nights without replaying that birthday recording. "Excuse me, do you know which wood would work best for outdoor shelving?" Thomas looked up from the lumber he was examining at Riverside Building Supply. A woman stood nearby, late 40s or early 50s, wearing jeans and a faded denim shirt. Her hair was silver-streaked brown, pulled back practically, and she had the kind of tan that came from working outdoors, not lying on beaches. "Depends on the exposure," Thomas replied. "Full sun and rain or covered?" "Covered porch, but it's Florida, so..." She gestured helplessly at the varieties of wood. Cedar or pressure-treated pine would work. Cedar's prettier, smells better, naturally resistant to rot. Pine's cheaper, but needs more maintenance. She moved closer to examine the boards he indicated. You sound like you know your wood. I do a fair bit of woodworking. Lucky. I'm trying to learn, but YouTube only gets you so far. She extended a hand. I'm Clara, by the way. Just moved to the area. Thomas. Her handshake was firm, calloused. Working hands. Would you mind? I mean, if you have a minute, could you help me figure out what I need? I'll buy you a coffee as thanks. Thomas almost said no, his default response to social overtures these days. But something in her straightforward manner, the lack of artifice, made him nod. They spent 20 minutes going through her project shelving for a photography studio she was building in her barn. She was a nature photographer, recently divorced, starting over in rural Florida. I was in Chicago for 30 years, she explained over coffee at the tiny cafe next door. But after my marriage ended, I needed space, quiet, room to figure out who I am when I'm not being someone's wife. Thomas understood that need intimately. How long since the divorce? 2 years. You? He hesitated. About 8 months. Ah, still fresh. She studied him with photographer's eyes, seeing more than he'd intended to reveal. Let me guess it wasn't your idea. You could say that. She didn't push, which he appreciated. They talked instead about wood and tools, her photography, his furniture making. Easy conversation, no subtext or agenda. I should let you get back to your day, Clara said finally. But thank you. You've saved me from building shelves that would collapse at the first humidity spike. If you need help with the actual building, I could give you some pointers, Thomas heard himself offering. I mean, if you want to learn. Her smile was warm, genuine. I'd like that. Here, let me give you my card. The card was simple, her name, Nature Photography, and a phone number. No pretense, no overselling. Over the following weeks, they developed an easy friendship. Thomas would stop by her place to help with construction projects, teaching her about joints and grain direction. She'd share coffee and stories about her photography expeditions, showing him how she captured light and shadow. You have good eyes, she told him one afternoon, reviewing shots on her camera. You see the details others miss. Occupational hazard. In woodworking, details matter. In life, too. She glanced at him. Is that how you knew? About your ex. Thomas had told her the bare minimum about his divorce infidelity, financial betrayal, a bad ending. Nothing about death wishes or public humiliation. I missed all the signs, he admitted. Saw only what I wanted to see. We all do that. I spent 20 years thinking my husband's distance was just stress from work. Turns out he'd been in love with his secretary for a decade. She laughed, but it wasn't bitter. The cliches are cliches because they're common, I guess. How do you trust again after that? Clara considered. You don't, not the same way. But maybe that's good? That blind trust we have when we're young, it's beautiful but dangerous. Now I trust with my eyes open, slower, more careful, but also more real. They were sitting on her porch, the late afternoon sun painting everything gold. Thomas realized this was the first real conversation he'd had with a woman since Hannah. Not flirtation, not agenda, just connection. I should go, he said, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the moment. Early morning tomorrow. Thomas. Clara's voice stopped him. I'm not looking for anything complicated. My life's just starting to make sense again, but I value your friendship. I hope that's okay. More than okay. Driving home, Thomas felt something shift inside him. Not healing that had been happening slowly for months. This was different. A recognition that maybe, eventually, he could connect with someone again. Not now, not soon, but someday. The farmhouse welcomed him home, solid and true. He'd built something here, literally and figuratively. A life stripped of pretense, founded on honest work and careful trust. In the workshop, a half-finished table waited. Cherry wood, grain like flowing water. He'd started it without a plan, letting the wood tell him what it wanted to be. Now he saw it clearly, a dining table. Simple, elegant, built to last generations. Maybe he'd keep it, Or maybe someday, he'd give it to a friend who understood that the best things took time, patience, and respect for the material you were working with, including yourself. 2 years had passed since Thomas first set foot on the riverfront property. The transformation was complete, both of the land and the man who worked it. The simple farmhouse had become a craftsman's home, every detail bearing the mark of patient hands and careful thought. Morning mist rose from the Mayaka River as Thomas stood on his rebuilt porch, coffee steaming in the cool October air. The cypress railings he'd carved himself caught the early light, their grain flowing like water frozen in wood. Behind him, through the open door, came the sound of movement in the kitchen. "Coffee's getting cold," Clara called out, her voice carrying the easy familiarity of someone who belonged. She emerged carrying her own mug and her camera, dressed in worn jeans and one of his flannel shirts. Her hair was silver now, fully embraced rather than hidden. She'd been staying over more often lately, her own place 10 minutes away feeling increasingly unnecessary. "Got that commission finished?" she asked, settling into the rocking chair beside his. "Last coat of oil went on yesterday. That dining set for the Penninsons." "The cherry wood one? Thomas, that's beautiful work. Museum quality." He shrugged, but pleasure warmed his chest. 2 years ago, he'd been fumbling with basic joints. Now his furniture had a waiting list, word spreading through the rural community about the former real estate developer who'd found magic in wood. "Sam's coming by later," Thomas said, "bringing the kids." "Good. I'll make my cornbread." The easy domesticity of it struck him. Clara had woven herself into his life so gradually he'd barely noticed until she was essential. She knew which drawer held the good knives, how he liked his eggs, where he kept aspirin for the headaches that came from hours bent over detailed work. After she left for a photography appointment, Thomas headed to the workshop. The barn had been completely transformed, insulated, climate-controlled, filled with tools both modern and antique. This was his sanctuary, where raw wood became something more. He was shaping a table leg on the lathe when a car pulled up. Not Samuel's truck, a rental sedan. Thomas killed the power, wiping sawdust from his hands as he walked out. The man stepping out of the car looked familiar in an unsettling way. It took Thomas a moment to place him David Brennan, Hannah's divorce lawyer. He'd aged poorly, his cheap suit now looking genuinely threadbare. "Mr. Thomas," Brennan said, clearly uncomfortable, "I apologize for the intrusion. I got your address from public records." "What do you want?" "It's about your ex-wife, Hannah. She asked me to contact you." Thomas's expression hardened. "I have nothing to say to her." "She's not asking for money," Brennan said quickly, "or forgiveness. She just wanted you to know she's getting help, real help. She's been sober 8 months, attending therapy. She wanted to make amends, part of her recovery program, but she'll respect your boundaries if you don't want contact." Thomas was silent for a long moment. Through the workshop door, he could see the furniture he'd built, solid, honest work that couldn't lie or betray. "Tell her I'm glad she's getting help," he said finally. "But that chapter is closed. I wish her well, but from a distance." Brennan nodded, seeming relieved. "I'll convey that. For what it's worth, Mr. Thomas, I think you handled everything with more grace than most would have. Good luck to you." After the lawyer left, Thomas returned to his work, but his hands weren't quite steady. Hannah, making amends. He wondered if she remembered that night, wishing him dead. If she understood the full weight of what she'd destroyed. His phone buzzed. "Clara. Strange light on the river. Bringing my camera. Make lunch?" He smiled, the ghost of Hannah fading. This was his life now, simple, honest, shared with someone who saw beauty in ordinary moments. Samuel arrived in the afternoon with his family, the kids immediately running toward the river with nets and buckets. His wife, Lisa, hugged Thomas warmly. "Place looks amazing," she said. "Every time we come, something new is finished." They gathered on the porch, watching the children play. Samuel's daughter had Thomas's dark hair, his son Samuel's mischievous grin. Family, real family, built on trust rather than obligation. "Remember when you first bought this place?" Samuel asked. "I thought you'd lost your mind. Middle of nowhere, falling apart." "Best decision I ever made." "Second best," Samuel corrected. nodding toward Clara returning with her camera. She's the best. Thomas couldn't argue. Clara showed the children her photos a great blue heron, morning light through Spanish moss, the very mist Thomas had watched at dawn. She had a gift for finding the extraordinary in the everyday, much like he'd learned to find beauty in wood grain and joint precision. That evening, after dinner, Thomas found himself alone with Clara by the river. The children were roasting marshmallows with their parents, their laughter carrying across the water. "Brennan came by today," he said quietly. "Hannah's lawyer." Clara didn't stiffen or pull away. She simply waited, knowing he'd share what he needed to. "She's in recovery. Wanted to make amends." "How do you feel about that?" Thomas considered. "Like looking at someone else's life through old glass. Distorted, distant. I hope she finds peace, but it has nothing to do with me anymore." Clara took his hand, her photographer's fingers calloused in different places than his. "You've built something good here, Thomas. Something real." He looked back at the house, warm light spilling from windows he'd rebuilt himself, his brother's family around the fire, the woman beside him who'd chosen to share his quiet life, the workshop where tomorrow he'd continue creating beauty from raw materials. "Yes," he said simply. "I have." Spring arrived early that year, painting the riverbank in explosions of wildflowers. Thomas was in the workshop, applying the final touches to a commissioned bookshelf when Samuel's truck pulled up, dust clouding behind it. His brother's face through the window looked troubled. "What's wrong?" Thomas asked as Samuel entered, not bothering with pleasantries. "Just got off the phone with Mom. You know she still has friends in Sarasota who keep her updated on things." Thomas set down his sandpaper. He knew what things meant. "What now?" "Hannah left Florida. Apparently she's been in Ohio for 6 months, working at some diner, living with a cousin." Samuel paused, studying his brother's face. "Mom's friend saw her before she left, said she looked different, older. Tired." Thomas turned back to the bookshelf, running his hand along the smooth surface. "Good. Maybe she'll find some peace there." "That's it? That's all you feel?" "What should I feel, Sam? Satisfaction? Pity? I used all those up already." He faced his brother again. "She made her choices. Now she's living with them. Same as me." Samuel leaned against the workbench. "And Jason? What about him?" "Completely ruined. Lost everything in the federal case. Turns out the FBI had been watching him even before your party revelation. He got 2 years minimum security for the bribes, just got out last month. Word is he's working at a car dealership in Mississippi, not selling, washing them." Thomas absorbed this information, waiting for some surge of vindication. It didn't come. These were just facts now, distant as newspaper stories about strangers. "Michelle's divorce finalized too," Samuel continued. "Lost custody of her kids completely. The judge cited her toxic influence on family relationships." Christ. That did stir something, those children paying for their mother's poison. The kids don't deserve that. No, they don't. But maybe they're better off away from her influence. Samuel picked up a piece of cherry wood, examining the grain. "It's like dominoes, you know? One push and everything falls." "I didn't push anything. I just stopped holding it all up." They stood in comfortable silence, surrounded by the tools and wood shavings of Thomas's new life. Finally, Samuel spoke again. "Clara's good for you." "I know. I mean it, the way she looks at you. It's how Lisa looks at me, like she sees who you really are and likes it anyway." Thomas smiled. "She says I'm a work in progress, like my furniture rough in some places, but with good bones. Speaking of which," Samuel's tone turned serious, "when are you going to stop pretending she's just a friend who happens to stay over 4 nights a week?" "We're taking it slow." "It's been 2 years, Tom. That's not slow. That's glacial." Thomas knew his brother was right. Clara had been patient, never pushing, but lately he'd caught her looking at the empty spaces in his house where her things could go. She'd mentioned, casually, that her lease was up soon. "I'll talk to her," he said finally. "Good. Because Mom's already planning your wedding in her head, and you know how she gets when reality doesn't match her plans." That evening, Thomas found Clara on the porch, editing photos on her laptop. The golden hour light made her silver hair glow. She looked up as he approached, reading something in his expression. "Sam told you about Hannah," she said. It wasn't a question. "Among other things." He sat beside her, the swing creaking familiarly. "He thinks I'm an idiot for not asking you to move in." "Are you? An idiot?" "Probably, but not about that." He took her hand, studying the familiar calluses and age spots. "I've been scared, Clara. Not of you, of being vulnerable again. Of trusting that completely." "I know." Her voice was gentle. "I've been scared too. But Thomas, we're not those people anymore, the ones who got hurt. We're who we became after." She was right. The man who'd driven through a snowstorm with birthday cake was gone. So was the woman who'd spent 20 years with a man who loved his secretary. In their place sat two people who'd learned to build new lives from ruins. "Your lease is up soon," he said. 6 weeks. That's enough time to clear out the spare room. Turn it into a proper office for you. The light's better on that side for editing." Clara's smile started small and spread like sunrise. "Are you asking me to move in, Thomas Merrick?" "I'm asking you to help me stop being an idiot." She laughed, the sound bright as the evening birds. "Well, when you put it that way." Later, as they prepared dinner together, a dance they'd perfected without realizing, Thomas felt the last ghost of his old life fade. Somewhere in Ohio, Hannah was serving coffee and trying to rebuild. Somewhere in Mississippi, Jason was washing cars and facing his diminished reality. Michelle was alone with her bitterness. But here, in this kitchen, he'd rebuilt with his own hands. With a woman who saw beauty in ordinary light, Thomas was complete. Not healed, healing never really ended, but whole nonetheless. His phone buzzed, a text from a client confirming a commission for a bedroom set. Another from Samuel with a photo of his kids holding a fish they'd caught. Life, moving forward like the river outside, carrying what mattered and leaving the rest behind. "I've been thinking," Clara said, stirring pasta. "That back acre would be perfect for a greenhouse. I could grow herbs, maybe some vegetables." "We'd need to run water lines," Thomas said automatically, already calculating the logistics. "We," Clara repeated softly, smiling. I like the sound of that. So did Thomas. More than he'd thought possible, back when his world had shattered in a snowstorm. Sometimes the best things came not from fixing what was broken, but from building something entirely new. 3 years later, on a perfect March morning, Thomas stood beneath the ancient oak tree that had witnessed so many of his quiet moments with Clara. His hands, usually steady when shaping wood, trembled slightly as he adjusted the simple silver cufflinks Samuel had given him. "Nervous?" Samuel asked, standing beside him in his role as best man. "Terrified," Thomas admitted, "but the good kind." The backyard had been transformed without losing its natural beauty. White chairs arranged in small clusters rather than rigid rows, wildflowers in mason jars. Clara's photographs hung from the tree branches, moments from their life together that told their story better than words could. Only 20 people had been invited. After the spectacle of his first wedding, 300 guests, he barely knew Thomas had wanted something real. These were the people who'd stood by him, who'd watched him rebuild, who truly celebrated this new beginning. Evelyn sat in the front row, dabbing her eyes before the ceremony had even started. She'd arrived a week early, ostensibly to help with preparations, but really to ensure her son was truly happy. She'd found him in his workshop at midnight, crafting one final piece. "What are you making?" she'd asked. He'd shown her a simple wooden picture frame, carved with intertwining vines. "For Clara. For our first photo as married." Evelyn had hugged him then, fierce and protective as she'd been when he was small. "Your father would be so proud," she'd whispered. "You found your way back to yourself." Now, music drifted from speakers hidden among the flowers, not a wedding march but a melody Clara had hummed while developing photos that Thomas had tracked down and surprised her with. The small gathering turned toward the house. Clara emerged, and Thomas's breath caught. She wore a simple cream dress that moved like water, her silver hair crowned with small white flowers. But it was her expression that undid him, joy mixed with certainty, the look of someone who knew exactly where she was meant to be. Dr. Patricia Morgan, Clara's oldest friend and a notary, waited to officiate. They'd wanted someone who knew them, not a stranger reading scripted words. Clara reached him, and he took her hands, photographer's hands meeting carpenter's hands, both marked by their crafts and choices. "Before we begin," Patricia said, her voice warm, "Thomas and Clara have asked to share their own words." Thomas had practiced this speech a dozen times, but now, looking at Clara, he forgot his prepared remarks. "I was driving through a storm when my life ended," he began, his voice rough. "I thought I'd lost everything, but I hadn't lost anything real. I'd been freed from illusion. You came into my life when I'd learned to be alone but hadn't yet remembered how to share. You taught me that trust isn't blindness, it's choice, made daily, with eyes wide open." He pulled out the wooden frame he'd made. "This is empty now, waiting for our first photo together as husband and wife. Like I was empty when we met, waiting for something I didn't even know I needed. You filled that frame, Clara, not with illusion, but with truth, with quiet mornings and shared silences and the knowledge that love isn't grand gestures, it's choosing to stay, to build, to grow. I choose you, today and always." Clara was crying now, not bothering to hide it. When she spoke, her voice was clear and strong. "I came to Florida running from failure, from 20 years of being invisible in my own life. I thought solitude was safety. Then I met a man buying cedar planks who took time to help a stranger, who showed me that strength can be gentle and silence can be full." She touched the frame in his hands. "You gave me space to be myself, while somehow making me want to share that space with you. You've taught me that love the second time isn't about forgetting the first, it's about learning from it, being grateful for the lessons that led us here." She reached into her pocket, pulling out a small wooden heart Thomas had carved years ago, a practice piece he'd thought he'd thrown away. "I kept this. It was rough, imperfect, but I saw what it could become. Like us. We're works in progress, Thomas, but we're working on them together." Patricia smiled, wiping her own eyes. "Well, after that, the legal parts seem inadequate, but necessary. The vows were simple, traditional. They'd lived through complicated. Now they wanted straightforward truth." When Patricia pronounced them married, Thomas kissed Clara like a man who'd learned that some chances don't come twice. The reception was in the workshop, transformed with lights and flowers but still smelling of sawdust and possibility. No assigned seats, no formal program, just people they loved celebrating under the tools of Thomas's trade. "To second chances," Stephen Frost raised his glass during an impromptu toast. The lawyer had become a friend over the years, his cold efficiency warming into genuine affection, and to those wise enough to take them. As afternoon faded to evening, Thomas found himself by the river with Clara, still in her wedding dress but barefoot now, her shoes abandoned somewhere by the dance floor Samuel had built. "No regrets?" she asked, leaning into him. "Only that it took so long to get here. We needed the time, both of us." She held up the wooden heart. "Some things can't be rushed." They stood together, watching the river that had witnessed his healing, their courtship, and now their wedding. Somewhere, his first life continued its consequences, Hannah in her exile, Jason in his diminishment, Michelle in her bitterness. But those were distant shores he no longer visited. Here, with Clara's hand in his and their friends' laughter carrying across the water, Thomas was exactly where he belonged. The storm that had begun with betrayal had led him to this calm water, this gentle love, this life built on truth rather than assumption. "What are you thinking?" Clara asked. "That I'm glad I drove through that storm," he said simply. "It brought me home." 5 years had passed since the wedding by the river. Thomas sat on the same porch, in the same chair, but everything else had transformed. The workshop had expanded into a teaching studio where he mentored young craftspeople. Clara's photographs graced gallery walls from Sarasota to Miami. Their life together had grown roots as deep as the old oak that shaded their home. This morning was special. Samuel's family was visiting for Thomas's 40th birthday, though he'd tried to forbid any fuss. The smell of Clara's famous cinnamon rolls drifted from the kitchen, mixing with coffee and the ever-present scent of sawdust. "Uncle Thomas!" Samuel's daughter, now 13, bounded onto the porch. Mom says you have to see what we made. In the workshop, his family had collaborated on a gift, a photo album crafted with Samuel's engineering precision, Lisa's artistic eye, and the children's enthusiasm. Each page held moments from the past 5 years. Thomas teaching his nephew to use a lathe, Clara photographing the kids by the river, family dinners that stretched late into evening. Look at this one. Clara pointed to a photo of Thomas at his workbench, lost in concentration. This is why I fell in love with you. The way you disappear into your work, completely present. I thought it was my devastating good looks, Thomas deadpanned. That too, she laughed, kissing his graying temple. After breakfast, Thomas walked alone to the river, needing a moment of solitude amid the happy chaos. The same path, the same trees, but he was fundamentally changed from the man who'd first stood here, raw with betrayal and plotting revenge. A blue heron fished in the shallows, patient and precise. Thomas watched it strike, successful, and thought about patience, about waiting for the right moment. He'd spent 3 weeks planning Hannah's downfall. He'd spent 8 years building this life. The math was instructive. Thought I'd find you here, Samuel joined him, carrying 2 beers despite the early hour. Birthday privilege. They drank in companionable silence before Samuel spoke. Remember what you said at the courthouse? About being free? Yeah. Were you? Really? Thomas considered. Not then. I was still carrying it all, the anger, the humiliation, the need to be right. Freedom came later, slowly. When? The day I realized I hadn't thought about her in a month, that I could hear about her struggles without feeling satisfaction or guilt, that I could remember the good times and there were some without bitterness poisoning them. Samuel nodded. I ran into someone last week from the old neighborhood. They asked about you, mentioned that party. You know what I realized? Most people have forgotten. It was the biggest drama of their year, maybe, but then life moved on. New scandals, new gossip. Good, Thomas said. That's as it should be. They walked back to find the party in full swing. Not a party. Really, just the people Thomas loved gathered in the space he'd built. Stephen Frost had driven up from Sarasota with his new wife. Rick Morrison, retired now but still sharp-eyed, argued politics with Evelyn. Clara's photography students mingled with Thomas's woodworking apprentices. As the day progressed, Thomas found himself pulled aside by his nephew, now 15 and struggling with his parents' rules, with finding his place. Uncle Thomas, how do you know what's worth fighting for? Thomas thought about highways and snowstorms, about birthday cakes left on counters, about years spent building furniture and trust in equal measure. You fight for truth, he said finally, for people who see you clearly and choose to stay, for work that matters to you, even if it doesn't matter to anyone else. And sometimes the best fight is knowing when to walk away. The boy nodded, not fully understanding yet, but filing it away. Thomas had learned that wisdom was like woodworking. You could show someone the technique, but they had to develop their own feel for it. As sunset approached, Thomas stood before his gathered family and friends. The speech came without planning, words rising from some deep well of gratitude. 8 years ago, I thought my life was over. In a way, it was. The life built on assumptions, on surface perfection, on being what I thought I should be, that life needed to end. He found Clara's eyes, drew strength from her steady gaze. But endings aren't just about loss. They're about clearing space for what comes next. He gestured to the house, the workshop, the people filling both. This life, these connections, they're built on truth, on showing up as yourself, flaws and all, and trusting others to do the same. It's harder than living behind masks. It's also infinitely more rewarding. Thomas raised his beer, the setting sun turning everything golden. To second chances, to the storms that redirect us, to the family we choose and the family that chooses us, and to the beautiful, difficult, necessary work of becoming who we really are. The toast echoed across the water, voices joining in celebration. As the party continued into evening, Thomas found himself back on the porch with Clara, watching fireflies dance above the river. Any regrets? She asked, their old ritual. None that matter, he replied. You? Just one. She smiled mysteriously. I wish I'd met you sooner. No, Thomas said firmly. We met exactly when we needed to. When we were ready." She squeezed his hand, understanding. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to laughter from the house, to the river's constant voice, to the night birds beginning their songs. Thomas thought about the man he'd been, driving through that snowstorm with such desperate love. That man had needed to break, to shatter completely, before he could rebuild as someone worthy of the life he now lived. The betrayal had been agony, but it had also been liberation. A firefly landed on the porch rail, pulsing its ancient signal, looking for connection, for its match in the darkness. Thomas watched it fly away, continuing its search, and smiled. "What?" Clara asked. "Just thinking about light, how sometimes you have to go through complete darkness to really appreciate it. Very philosophical for a carpenter. Woodworkers are all philosophers. We just express it through joints and grain instead of words." She laughed, the sound blending with the river and the distant party. "I love you, you know." "I know," he said. "That's the miracle." As the first stars appeared above the Florida pines, Thomas felt the deep peace that comes from a life honestly lived. Somewhere out there, his past continued its separate existence. But here, now, surrounded by chosen family and earned wisdom, he was complete. The storm had passed. The rebuilding was done. What remained was life itself, messy, beautiful, and absolutely worth the journey that had brought him here. In the workshop, his latest creation waited for tomorrow's finishing touches. On the river, the herons settled for the night. And on the porch of a house built by scarred hands and careful hope, Thomas held his wife's hand and watched the stars emerge, each one a reminder that light is most beautiful when it rises from darkness. The story that began with betrayal ended with belonging. The man who'd lost everything had gained what mattered, and in the quiet of a Florida evening, with love beside him and peace within him, Thomas knew the greatest truth of all. Sometimes we have to lose our way to find our home.